Progressive organizations like the Sunrise Movement and Justice Democrats are making it clear that they demand the Biden cabinet be filled with like-minded individuals, progressive lawmakers, progressive public figures who would help to carry out the progressive policies that these organizations have been fighting for. So naturally, the names Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren did come up. The groups are pressing Biden to appoint Warren as Treasury Secretary and Sanders as Labor Secretary, a position he has expressed some interest in. Both standard bearers of the progressive movement, whose policies are viewed by some Democrats as too extreme. So corporate Democrats certainly view them as too extreme. Sanders and Warren come from states led by Republican governors, and that is notable. And it's not clear who would fill their seats if they became vacant. Governor Phil Scott of Vermont said last month that if Sanders were appointed to the cabinet, he would choose an independent who would caucus with the Democrats as a replacement. And progressives have argued that the Democratic-controlled legislature in Massachusetts would try to change state law to ensure a Democrat would temporarily replace Warren. But there are some downsides to progressives like Bernie Sanders, for instance, leaving the Senate to serve on Biden's cabinet or in Biden's cabinet. For instance, there are several Senate committees that Bernie currently serves on, and they're important committees, including Environmental and Public Works, or Environment and Public Works, Energy and Natural Resources, Health, Education, Labor and Pensions, Budget, and Veterans Affairs. There are other committees that he could be the chair of if Democrats take control of the Senate. And remember, there are still 2 Senate races that will be decided in January. These are runoff races in Georgia. And so we have some details on that. But before we do, I wanted to get your thoughts on this, John.
Yeah. First of all, I get that, I guess part of the way Republicans are acting and how we have to respond to it, we have to fight, dirty too. But changing the state law for this particular situation where it would advantage you, we don't like that when the Republicans do it. So I don't love the idea. Going into it when I was originally hearing that one or both of them, and it seems more like Warren are interested in joining the cabinet, I didn't necessarily understand why you would want to do that. I get it, especially if the Senate doesn't have a 50-50 split, then it makes more sense for them to be in the cabinet where they can get some stuff done just in terms of the functioning of the government, influence on executive orders, things like that. But if the Senate is going to be 50-50, then we should definitely want, like obviously a lot of people have problems with Warren, still a lot better than many of those senators, let alone Bernie. Without them, I mean, what do you have in the Senate? Let's remember that while the progressives have been quite successful over the past 2 election cycles in getting people into the House, so far in the Senate, not so much. Like without them, and I mean, even based on the scores, Kamala Harris was towards that end. What do we really have in the Senate at that point? No, it's basically Chuck and Joe.
I think you make a great point. I mean, we have a system of checks and balances for a reason, and I think Congress is lacking in their ability to check the executive branch lately. So I think it would be far more effective to keep Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren in the Senate. And I had a debate about this with my co-host Nando Vila on Weekends, the show that we host for Jacobin, and we had a legendary economist, Richard Wolff, on to discuss it with us. And I think that the perspective of Richard Wolff is important to add to this conversation. So I have a quick clip from that episode, and please excuse some of the Professor Wolff was having some technical issues, I'll just put it that way. But with that said, let's take a quick look at his thoughts on this matter. There's a little bit of a debate happening right now as to where Senator Sanders would be more effective as labor secretary in a Biden administration, or if he remains in the Senate, where if Democrats take control of the Senate, he could chair 2 important subcommittees, including the Senate Budget Committee and the Senate Subcommittee on Health.
If I were Bernie, if he asked my advice, don't do this. Stay in the Senate, go after those committee positions if they are even possible or available. Given what I know about Mr. Schumer, I wouldn't be too hopeful there either. But nonetheless, if he can, good. But whether or not he can, he is a formidable foe outside. And if he uses that position if he mobilizes, if he works, he can have at least as much influence on what finally happens as he could by being closer to the seat of power.
So John, I mean, I agree with his take. I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's not to say that other people listed by the Sunrise Movement and Justice Democrats wouldn't be a fantastic idea in Biden's administration. I'll get to that in just a minute, but any response to Professor Wolf?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. It really just is, there's pros and cons, and like I said, it's not just one set of pros and cons. It is very much pros and cons based on what the future of the Senate is going to look like. And at this point, we honestly just don't know. I mean, I would feel a lot more comfortable if I knew that not only would they be replaced by Democrats, but they'd be replaced by Democrats that we are at least somewhat comfortable ideologically with, but I don't necessarily assume that. The idea that the Senate would be on balance more conservative afterward, that I don't like that idea.
Right, I totally agree. Now there were other suggestions, other potential appointments that I think would be great. I mean, to be honest, I think it's a long shot, just like I think it's a long shot with Warren and Sanders, but let me give you some of these names. The economist Joseph Stiglitz for director of the National Economic Council. I think that's a fine pick. I love that suggestion.
Yeah.
Representative Pramila Jayapal of Washington as co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus for Secretary of Health and Human Services.
I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yep, that totally makes sense. She's a huge supporter of Medicare for all.
Yeah, of course. So that's why they're probably not gonna pick her. I mean, but I like the idea. That is who I would put up for the position.
Yeah, for sure. Representative Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, one of the 4 congresswomen known as the Squad, for Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. I think that would also be fantastic.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I think also Ilhan Omar was involved in a really good housing bill that I think could have been good too. And I mean, look, it would happen for both, but if it was Representative Omar, the right wing is exploding. It would be amazing.
Let's keep it real. I think moderate Democrats' heads would explode too.
Yeah, that's probably.
And again, these organizations are serious about pressuring Biden to, pick these progressive lawmakers for these incredibly important positions. I don't think he's gonna go in that direction, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't pressure him. Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota for Attorney General.
That's a good idea.
And Representative Barbara Lee of California for, and I like this one, Secretary of State. Remember, she was the only lawmaker who was willing to vote against invading Iraq. So
yeah, that's why I don't necessarily like setting up a precedent where when you like sort of demonstrate amazing judgment, it gets rewarded down the line. That just seems like a radical change to US government. I think we should stick with what it is right now, which is where you can fail and fail and fail and be wrong for decades and you will always find work inside or outside of government.
I mean, failing upward is as American as apple pie.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.